Everybody can hear, right? Yeah? All right. Welcome to Queer Communities, Queer Anthologies. This panel is being sponsored by Little Heart, a comic anthology for marriage equality, published in partnership by 2D Cloud and MN Love to fight and raise awareness of the 2012 referendums to Minnesota's Constitution. The Little Heart collection is debuting at Cake this weekend at Table 50, 2D Cloud. So check that out. All right. So to introduce our panelists, I guess we'll start here and go that way. Annie Murphy is an unconventional magical mastermind. Did you write this? Sorry about that. That's what it says here. It must be true. She's a graduate of the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont, where she produced her Zurich-winning comic, I Still Live, about the spiritualist and activist Asha Sprague. Did I mispronounce that?
It's Oxa, but you never know.
Oxa Sprague. Her work plays a major role in the collective Tarot, which reinterprets the Tarot's tradition with a rowdy, sexy, and radical queer activist perspective. In addition to her own comics and artwork, she's also the editor of the ambitious Ignatz-nominated comics anthology Game Genius, published last year by Sparkplug Comics, encompassing a diverse and experimental collection of comics about queer history and community. Moving over, Robert Kirby has been a mainstay of small press comics for over 20 years. His work, Curbside, garnered a Zurich grant, and his anthology, Boy Trouble, has been collected into 2 volumes from Green Candy Press. In addition to a steady stream of self-published mini-comics, Kirby has been hard at work on editing a new queer anthology comic, the Ignatz-nominated Series 3, which is the latest recipient of Prison Comics' Queer Press grant. The latest issue, number 3, is debuting this weekend. And at the far end, Zurich-winning cartoonist Justin Hall has never shied away from representing queer content in his work. From his self-published True Travel Tales series to the porn comic Hard to Swallow, to his cheeky character Glamazonia, the uncanny super tranny, Hall's work embraces LGBTIQ lives and identities. Hall is a board member of the Prison Comics organization and the editor of No Straight Lines, a survey of the history and legacy of queer comics from the past 40 years, which is massive. it's pretty amazing. Published by Fantagraphics and debuting here at Cake. And I'm Noah Berlatsky. I run a comics and culture blog called The Hooded Utilitarian. And a few years back, I put together an online symposium on the topic of the gay utopia, which Edie was in, which is why I'm here, I think. And this is the first panel I think I've ever moderated, so if it's a bit bumpy, I apologize. I think we'll be here for 50 minutes, and then we'll take audience questions at the end. So we'll get started. And maybe we'll just go down if that's all right. So the first question I was interested in the criteria for inclusion in your anthologies, especially as queer anthologies. Sort of, are you primarily looking at aesthetic quality in some sort of objective way when you choose people for inclusion? Or is an anthology supposed to be an expression, a reflection, or a document of a particular community? And are those criteria in tension at all, or is separating them out difficult even?
I'll take it. Gay Genius, my book, our book. As far as criteria goes, well, it was intended as a documentation of a specific community, just the people that I knew and friends, exes, dates, housemates, things like that. And then friends of friends. Is pretty much who wound up in the book. And there were people that I was pretty familiar with most people's work at that time, but then some of the contributors recommended, said, oh, you really got to get, Alicia in there, like different people. And basic criteria was that just not to be offensive to me. And I know that because there was like a big PC backlash for a while, I think, with comics, and that's, if that's your thing, that's your thing. But for me, I knew a lot of people that just wouldn't even pick up comics, or would pick them up and be like, oh, okay, yeah, here's another racist caricature, here's another, ableist situation, and it's like, haha, funny. And I can stomach a bit of that, but if it was something that it was, my ideal would be not that. And so that was, the criteria was basically, I wrote a manifesto, and then I sent it to several people, and maybe like 10 or 20 artists, I'll say. And then if they felt that, then they would send me something in, and I just kind of trusted that people would bring it in the way that I was hoping, and they really did.
Did you reject anyone?
Did I reject anybody? Yes, there were some people that heard about it through the grapevine, and I was really specific about sort of curating it. I know that's not super popular, but I was sort of the mind that, well, you know, reject kindly, do your own anthology, do that kind of thing. And there were some pieces that I asked people to alter or to go back over, or I knew that they had more in them than what they were giving. There was a lot of coaxing involved. So.
Were you rejecting on the base of, was it because they were offensive? Was it because it wasn't aesthetically what you were looking for?
As far as aesthetics, no, that didn't. It was mostly because it was getting too big, and I already had like a lot, and I had planned for it to be a zine originally with staple bound, and then by the time it got over 120 pages, I was like, this needs to be a book. So, and I had to just limit, which was sad, but.
Yeah, I would say definitely my first criteria is aesthetic. I have to like the creator. I mean, in issue 3, I say right at the outset of the new one, it says it was instigated, curated, and edited by Robert Kirby, and 3 is heavily curated. People have asked me to be in it, but if they could, but I really kind of go instinctually. I just really. I know, it just kind of like stuck in my head that I had to get Carrie McNinch and Ed Luce in this issue. Just like in the debut issue, I really wanted to work with Eric Warner and Joey Allison Sayers, and I don't know why the two of them, they struck a chord in me that they had to be in the same book, but it's like this, it's an instinctual thing, I guess. And I feel like with Boy Trouble and with 3, community wasn't my first motive, but I feel like that gets created, you know, as the titles grow and mature. And I love the fact that the Boy Trouble boys like all know each other and they hang out sometimes, and they write to each other because they are in different states. So yeah, I guess it's just I like it being kind of organic, you know.
Is there? Okay, I was talking about an issue of trying to avoid some kinds of content as being offensive, or I mean, you're doing a very different thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've rejected something, but for the most part, I try to be a loving, nurturing editor, and I try to just bring out their strengths. And you know, some creators really want a lot of input. Like Carrie and I worked really closely together on her story. Same with Eric. And then other people like Ed Luce, they just do the work, and I just stay out of it and let them just do their magic. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, over the years, I've edited so many little anthologies that I suppose I've rejected some people, or I don't really remember anymore. Currently, they're very carefully curated and selected. Yeah.
It's perfect daddy thoughts for Father's Day, I think. Yes.
Yeah, it's like, editing is like being a mom or dad. It really is, you know? Yeah. It's great.
Okay, yeah. I got one. Okay. I got my own, please. A couple of my other pieces, like Glamazonia and Hard to Swallow, I brought in different creators to, Hard to Swallow I did with Dave Davenport, who's my collaborator on the book, and we brought in guest illustrators to work on different pieces, and then Glamazonia has a lot of different guest illustrators that I wrote everything in the book, but I brought in a lot of different illustrators. But I wanted to have different kinds of voices and different people that would interpret the character. So a lot of it was just about my own interest in seeing the character interpreted in different styles. And since I was skewering different aspects of kind of queer culture, I wanted to be also kind of representationally accurate with, you know, having, you know, lesbian creators and trans creators and bi creators. No Straight Lines was a really different experience because it's, you know, my attempt to kind of collect a kind of best of LGBT comics. So I had to be very clear and specific in my own head about my kind of boundaries around this stuff. So I didn't use any. It's non-erotic work, so it's literary, meaning non-porn work. I feel like a lot of the erotic comics have been better archived in the past. So groups like the Tom of Finland Foundation have been archiving queer erotic comics for a long time. The queer literary comics are more in danger of being kind of vanishing, basically, from the landscape. And there's enough of that material to fill a book for sure, and more. And then also, there's no manga here. There's no Asian work. The kind of Asian comics, especially manga, have their own kind of world to them, their own kind of internal dynamics that require their own book, basically. So that was and then also there were problems with. A lot of people were doing these kind of longer form pieces, either graphic novels or long form web comics and stuff that were very hard to excerpt from. So there's a lot of really good work that I couldn't really excerpt because I wanted everything in this book to be satisfying read in and of itself. And that really limited me. So I really kept to short stories, one-page pieces, excerpts that had a kind of satisfying sense of completion to them. And then in terms of what I was looking for, there was essentially three categories. A kind of artistic merit was certainly number one. It had to be good work. Then it would be historical merit, because this is looking at 4 decades of queer comics, and there's a lot of kind of history here that has to be represented. And then what I would call representational merit, making sure that there was so many different kinds of voices in queer communities, and making sure that as much as possible I was kind of giving voice to the breadth of that. So yeah, there was a lot of factors going into how I put the thing together, and it was daunting. And I would pull at my hair. I don't really have any left, but it was kind of daunting at times. But it was. And the more you kind of start digging at the material, the more things get uncovered. So it did feel kind of never ending at a certain point. But at a certain point, you actually have to send in the completed manuscript and be done with it.
So what was the last thing you cut out?
That I cut out?
Mm-hmm. Or the last thing you didn't include, the one thing you wish you had included that you hadn't been able to because it was too long or whatever.
There was a lot. There's a lot of European comics in here that I wish that. I'm American. I'm much more familiar with North American comics, but there's definitely some European stuff in here, and I was really excited about it. Some of the stuff has never been translated into English before. I'm sure that I'm missing some of that. I speak, passable Spanish and French, so I can kind of dig into that stuff. But I know that there's a lot of Italian work. Probably some German stuff that I missed. So there, if I had another 3 years to work on this book, I would probably do a lot more digging in Europe. And there's an Israeli cartoonist in here, but there's probably more stuff in the Middle East as well, and South America also. I got some stuff from Argentina, but I wasn't able to use any of it. I'm sure there's more material out there in Brazil and Argentina that I really should have probably found eventually, but I'm never going to admit that, only to you guys, and that's it. So.
Okay. So my second question was about the audience, and particularly who you see as the audience for these anthologies, which I think is probably quite different for each of you. So I guess on the one hand, are you attempting to make queer people more visible to a mainstream audience? Are you creating an anthology mostly for the queer community itself, or for a subset of that community? So just sort of what your thoughts are on that.
Well, a lot of the people that are published in Gay Genius were self-publishing already, and I would see zines by them that maybe they made 20 of them, or 30, 40 tops, and I was like, these are so good. I want other people like in other cities, or people that, community is such a tricky word, but basically. Oh, yeah, and it was around the time when a lot of queer teen suicides were being publicized, and it's hard to know whether, these things have been going on all along, or if it was like a wave, but that really kind of shoved me over the edge of like trying to figure out how to actually make it happen, because I had reached this stasis where I couldn't figure out how we were going to fund a full-color 140-page book. So I wanted young queer people to see voices by queers, disabled queers, queers of color, like trans people, like all kinds of voices. And I also like wanted a beautiful book that says gay on it to be in the comic shops. So as far as mainstream goes, I asked Edie to do the cover, and it's beautiful, and it's eye-catching, and I wanted that sort of, you know, I love zines and I value them, and I also love the comic books and the minis with the staples, like the big place in my heart. But like I wanted that spine. I wanted to say gay, and to see sort of like my people, the people that are in my close community, just kind of.
Why was the word gay important to you?
Why is the word gay? Well, I know, because it could have been like queer or something like that. Yeah, I think it's the broadest, and because like I mean, I don't know, it's not the broadest. Because it is used, it started to be used as like a diss or whatever. It's like it was going out of fashion, you know, and I'm all into like retro and everything, so. That isn't, but.
It's alliterative, right? Gay, genius.
Gay, yes, yes, and I had some people in my life referring to certain things as gay genius, like just something that a queer person did that was awesome was gay genius, and also the genius part. When I was in school in Vermont, 2 people visited that had won the Genius Grant, the MacArthur Fellowship. They give you $500,000 for being a genius. And then we kind of, one of them I ended up being in a poker game with, and you know, beat him out. I didn't win or anything. It was winner takes all. But I beat him, and I was like, okay, who decides these things? Who's the genius? Because my friends are geniuses, you know, like what we could do with $500,000. Well, you know, well, of course, but you know, that's just like one little facet. Maybe he didn't play very often or whatever. But yeah. So, and then a teacher of mine was saying, you know, people throw the word genius around. Geniuses are sort of like 1 in a million. You know, there's not that many geniuses or whatever. And I was like, I disagree. And then I looked up the definition of it and started really digging on that and all the different definitions. And as in, like, it used to mean spirit, guardian spirit, spirit of a place, spirit of like a people or a community. And that just came together that way. So.
And, you know, gay genius should be a new catchphrase. Oh, man, that is so gay genius. It's a great catchphrase. Yeah. This book is, like, so gay genius. Yes.
It's for everybody.
What was the question again?
Can I say something quickly about the title here, though? I put 4 decades of queer comics, and I've already gotten problems with people attacking the word queer. Where I got these bloggers came after the publicist, the sweet, awesome, sassy lesbian that does publicity at Fantagraphics, and these bloggers went after her for I think kind of gay Christian bloggers that were upset with use of the word queer, saying it was a hate crime and that she was a vile and despicable woman, you know, covered in the blood of murdered gay children because she was using. You know, she was involved in a book using hate word. So, I mean, you know, to a certain extent, like semantics get crazy, especially around LGBTIQ, blah, 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 blah issues. So, yeah.
We're asking about audience, like who you see as the audience for the work, whether it's a mainstream audience. Or
one thing I will say to what that person who was attacking you, you know, we're just editing comics, we're cartoonists, we cannot take on all the problems of the world, you know, it's, yeah. So I hope you don't take that to heart.
No,
but yeah, okay,
all right. Yes, we can.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess my audience, I mean, I guess with 3, people like Carrie and Ed and Joey Allison Sayers, they have a little bit of crossover with straight alt comics and like cool comics fans, you know, and I would really like to see, like, I would like to see more the comics alt people that are here just kind of quit worrying so much about if something's gay or whatever, and just really embrace all forms of this amazing art form. And so I guess I'm slightly assimilationist with 3. I'm trying to get more I don't want to keep all of us to be pigeonholed and ghettoized all the time. I mean, I would like for us to move forward a little bit and for some barriers to break down, you know. At the same time, I love the queer comics thing, and this book is amazing. We're all like so pathetically grateful to you, Justin, for putting together. I mean, everybody's just fondling it like it's a Bible or something. And I think what Annie's doing is amazing too. I mean, it's just a whole different feel, and you seem to have some sort of cross. I mean, Sparkplug was really behind that, and they're not a queer or gay.
Yeah. Thank you, Dylan Williams, for
Here.
Believing in this project and believing in so many people. Dylan, for those who don't know, ran Sparkplug and passed away last year due to cancer, and a few months after Gay Genius was out, and he had seen my book, I Still Live, the Zurich book, and he was the first person in Portland in, like, I would call it the mainstream alternative comic scene, you know, because at this point it is really very wide, and he was the first person in Portland to really give a shit about anything I was doing, and that was really awesome. And I approached him once about doing the project, and he said, I'm not going to do an anthology again. And then I was like, okay. And then I had told him, I had sort of reminded him, I was like, yeah, we're doing this anthology, and it's got these people in it. He's a big fan of Edie's, big fan of Lee Relbus, who's in it. And then he sat and thought about it and came back and was like, okay, let's make this happen. So wait, what was your original question? Did you?
We're just moving down.
Free form.
If you want, Justin, talk about the audience for your book.
Yeah. I guess for Glamazonia, who the hell wants to buy this thing is the audience. But for No Straight Lines, I definitely want. I want. I think queers tend to have a problem with understanding our own history. We're not an ethnic minority, so we don't have history passed down within families the same way. So we don't tend to understand our own history and our own culture in the same way. And comics history and culture are also very confusing, I think, because it's such an underground art form, and people don't oftentimes know where comics come from and how they evolved. So I wanted to make a book that was educational to kind of LGBT folk about the comics, the comics market and industry, and also for comics folk about this kind of parallel universe that's always existed of queer comics. The queer comics have existed in this kind of weird alternative space from the rest of the comic books world. They were only published in gay bookstores by gay publishers and gay newspapers. They were never out in comic book stores. So, Alison Bechdel, for example, was doing Dykes to Watch Out For 20 years. This is, probably one of the world's greatest cartoonists, doing Dykes to Watch Out For 20 years before she'd ever been to a comic book convention. So there's this kind of weird disconnect between this one particular insular kind of parallel universe of comics and the rest of the comic book industry. That's changing now, in part because of people like Robert and Annie. I mean, and Robert, you're talking about it being a bridge. I mean, you really started that from early on, from Boy Trouble, and then moving that into the comic book conventions and into the bookstores, and that's continuing. And that's what has to happen as we're kind of assimilating into the mainstream world. But the danger is that this stuff is going to get lost. That this kind of huge body of material that was created in the ghetto is going to be lost once the ghetto dissolves, because the gay bookstores and the gay publishers and the gay newspapers are disintegrating now. So that's kind of my attempt with an audience.
Yeah, it meant a lot to me that his biggest qualms were just that it was an anthology, not that it had anything to do with like queers or that it might be controversial to some people or anything. And there's a funny story when he debuted it at the Toronto, what is it called, TCAF. he told me about how people kept coming up. Well, for one thing, he was afraid it was going to be taken at the border because he had been given a list of words they were looking for, and gay was on it, you know. So, they ended up confiscating another book instead and just kind of passing that one by. And I was like, oh, that would have been some great publicity. But then he said the first day people grabbed the book because they just loved how it looked. They picked it up. They realized it said gay, and then they put it out. Oh, get over here. And then a couple people bought it, and then the next day they all sold. So I guess he said word had gotten around. People had read it and said, check this book out. It's good, you know. Awesome. So it's really interesting because it's not. I mean, for me, I'm still like DIY. We don't need the mainstream, you know, that kind of thing. But there is power that people hold in the publishing world, and that is very real. And yeah.
And you know, and give people that exposure. You know, I mean, I want as many people as possible to read it. Carrie and Ed and everybody else worked really hard on these stories. I want as many people to read them as possible, and they're really great. And you know, it shouldn't really matter that aren't we all people?
Right. Well, this is kind of maybe a bit along the same lines. I have a good friend who helped organize XPX for years, and last year they were trying to organize around the theme of women cartoonists. Was the theme of the show. And according to my friend, she said pretty much every female cartoonist under 30 balked at the idea of even being identified as female at all. And she said that supposedly the reasoning is that to be identified as female is to be unequal. The work should speak for itself without reference to the gender or identity of the creator. They don't want to be in a ghetto, basically. And I've heard, you sometimes hear this idea expressed by queer creators as well. There's an artist, Nicole Eisenman, who I was reading about, who's reluctant to have her work pigeonholed as lesbian. So I guess my question is, when you're putting together specifically gay or queer anthology, do you find contributors who are reluctant to be part of a project that is so linked to identity? And sort of more broadly, what are the advantages or disadvantages of embracing a queer identity as an artist? Is it a resource for art? Is it an aesthetic ghetto? Can it be both? Justin, I guess, was getting at this a little bit by talking about the way that being in a ghetto sort of allowed some of these comics to... So do you want to start and talk about that a little, about how the ghetto might have helped some of the comics exist?
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for the ghetto, the majority of these comics wouldn't exist. And I'm very clear about how, you know, it was people in the women's comics movement and the early lesbian underground comics and stuff that made all this possible. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those people, the courage, the artistic courage of those people, personal courage. You know, and Howard Cruz, who had to come out, you know, in an industry that was highly intolerant. He could have lost his job, lost his living, and then start to, you know, be the editor of an openly gay anthology. That was a tremendously courageous thing to do, and which is, you know, in this day and age, it's almost hard to kind of remember how important that was. Mary Wings, when she came out with the first lesbian comic, she had never heard the word lesbian until she was 19. She didn't even know what the word was, and then she heard it, realized that's what she was, and then, you know, knew that she had to make a comic about it to make sure that no other young women had to go through that. Now Christine Smith is doing, you know, web comics about a young trans girl, and you know, portraying her as this kind of not pathological, as this kind of normal girl, and that is kind of where essentially Mary Wings was back in 1972, you know, showing kind of young trans children that they're normal, and that there are really important reasons to kind of do ghetto work, to do kind of community work artistically. I think we owe it to each other. On the other hand, there is also a danger to being pigeonholed. And as we kind of, you know, as the ghetto itself can't support us. I mean, Alison Bechdel was able to make a living at making Dykes to Watch Out for 20 years because there were enough gay newspapers. Now there aren't. So if we're going to make a living as queer cartoonists, we need to actually be able to sell to and move out of the ghetto, of the queer ghetto. So it's important for us to be able to kind of understand our history in terms of this stuff, and then also, you know, move forward into the next generation.
Whatever that may be.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be. Yeah, I know what you said about Allison. Allison did make a living as a lesbian cartoonist, but she had to work it really hard. And like you said, the gay ghetto and the gay, we're assimilating, and so that's all disintegrating. And so, you know, I mean, I'm back to self-publishing, and that feels okay. But especially after my last publishing experience with the publisher. But yeah, it's important to do the work for the community, you know, to create the community and stuff. And like, that's, again, my first and foremost criteria is aesthetic. Like, I have to really be excited about these artists, and otherwise it's going to be a dead work, and it's not going to generate any sparks or excitement with anybody. But I like to think that I guess I'm thinking of 3 as contributing to the literature, as adding to the canon, and just adding to the body of work that we're creating. And you're gonna have to do a second volume. Yeah, I'm sorry, Justin, but you are, eventually.
I'm only doing heterosexual comics from now on. That's I'm so sick of this stuff. So like, it's all headlines. Yeah.
Well, identity was like a huge part of this project, and identity, the idea of like identities. I know that like identity politics can be sort of limiting, and not everybody wants to do that, and so it's sort of, it helps to be an anthology. Like, it both like help, I think, people that are going out on a line and being like, I'm disabled, I'm queer, or I'm trans, I'm a person of color, and this is part of who I am and why I do the work that I do. Honestly, it helps kind of band together sometimes. At least it can feel like a lot sometimes to stick your neck out on a line if you're a member of any number of groups, marginalized groups. And so that was a big part of it, but it wasn't necessary. It wasn't, I don't know. I mean, I wanted to see, like, I had friends that were doing amazing work, and I wanted to see more of them getting published. I wanted to see more people of color getting published in comics, and for people to know that and to be able to see that. And that's like a lot of my friends around me that were doing this work, and as well as just like you know, in our biographies listing that we're disabled, there's another disabled comic artist that has come to me and been like, thank you for putting that in there, you know, that means a lot, or whatever. And so yeah, it's like you can be individual and a group.
I guess just to maybe, I mean, one of the things I was curious about is, I mean, I know that for women, there's often a pushback against being identified as a woman cartoonist. I mean, I was just kind of wondering if there's that same sort of sense in the gay community, or if there's, I mean, it may well not be. I'm just kind of curious if people have encountered that, or if that's something that people think about.
Well, I did hear at the women's memoir panel, and one of the women said, "Well, I'm not a feminist," and that there's a certain, I get a little bit, you know, our grandmothers and our great grandmothers fought for the right to vote, for like equal pay for equal work, for, you know, non-discrimination, you know, if the equal opportunities in the workplace, and that stuff shouldn't ever be discounted. We can't forget our history, I mean, I also understand people wanting to have the work be judged on its own merits, but we're not there yet. I mean, if you look at the industry, you know, how many, when you actually look at break down the numbers, like how many women are, you know, are being published, how many women are in the positions as publishers. I mean, it's very few. It's 2012. We're not there yet. So I get it, but you know, I think we still need this stuff.
Well, there's a panel about that very topic for women. That's the last panel of the day, right? It's about women. It's from Anne and Elizabeth Moore, and they're exploring the disparities in the comics industry with women and men, and it's still very real, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more women cartoonists. Like, I feel like doing self-publishing and coming up like at conventions and everything. But there was a time where I was like, I just scan the room and be like, do you have any work by women on this table? Do you have any work by women? You know, so like that there's already this kickback. I'm like, whoa, no, slow down. I mean, women cartoonists are, I mean, I get that if you want to be, if the idea is to be included in like the sort of heteronormative straight white man comics world, you know. But otherwise, I don't see why not. I mean, I know that Anthology got like a lot of flack, or has gotten a lot of criticism. This is an anthology that made like way more than their Kickstarter goal and stuff, and I just think that proves it even more. Just that people have a really hard time seeing women be successful still.
All right. Okay, so moving on a little bit. So one of the things about comics is it's comics themselves are pretty small in terms of entertainment, what people spend their entertainment dollars on, and gay comics are obviously even a tinier bit of that. So I guess the question is why do comics in particular, and if it has to be comics, why paper rather than the sparkly new internet thing that I understand is all the rage.
In my darkest moments, I ask myself that too. Like, why am I doing this? I think I think a lot of us do, and I think I know myself. I have to. It's just my creative expression, and I'm stuck with it for better and worse. Mostly for better. I love it, but we have our travails though.
How long have you been doing that?
I published Strange Like in Exile #1, and I started working on it in 1990, and I published it in June of '91, so 21 years now. Yeah. Ouch. Props to me.
Why do it?
Yeah. Why comics in particular?
Why comics?
Because especially your anthology is, seems like a lot of links to like the fine art world, for example, where there's queer presence is a lot. There's a lot more of it, arguably, and there's a bigger community, there's more acceptance, et cetera, et cetera.
Why comics? I do this lecture, I've done it before, called Comics as Survival, Creative Nonfiction in Graphic Narrative. And I think you can trace stories. I think that I don't think comics have just started in the last 100 or 200 years. I think that they're on this continuum of sort of pictures versus words, you could say, literacy versus oral history, things like that. I think comics are very much connected with oral history and folk art and indigenous traditions of people all over the world. And that, when I do this lecture, I talk about, these thousands-year-old graphic narratives that you can really tell a lot about the person that made it, or about the people that made it. And I think that there's something, inherently autobiographical about that, and inherently survivalist. A lot of the really big comics that get read by a lot of people are survivor stories, or are like biographies or memoriams of people, or discussing trials, tribulations. There's something about it, and I'm not sure. I think it's ancient.
Just one second. We're going to 4:30.
I thought it ended at 4:30.
3:30. Go to 4:30. 3:30 to 4:30. Huh? Yeah, that's wrong. It goes 3:30 to 4:30. It's an hour long. Yeah. You do. It's okay. You look panic-stricken.
I think that's the program, and it's.
I'm going to keep talking.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that.
So no worries. For me, comics feel it's really a visceral thing. Like, I grew up reading comics. That's how I learned to read. All that, so I'm just stuck with the medium. I've just been a geek from the very beginning. There's just no way out of it. That's fine. But if I'm going to rationalize it, I would say that there's three kind of elements to it. One is that it's a visual form. That's really important to me. One, that it's narrative. I really like a story. And then also the DIY aspect to it. So why comics? You could do film, but film costs a lot of money, and you need to work with so many other people, and it's like, it can't be just a personal vision. In the same way. Whereas comics, you can do this visual and narrative storytelling, just you and paper and a pen, and it's hard and it's complicated and it's not respected is the way it should be, but it has a great community and it's awesome. Awesome, yeah.
Or one other thing, one thing I'm kind of big on, and it seems to be happening more and more, are these jams where creators work together. There's a 7-person jam in the new 3 with people like Howard Cruz and me and Jen Camper and Ellen Forney and Joan Hilty, and it doesn't have to be solitary. I mean, you do draw your panels by yourself, but you put them together and it creates sparks, which creates community.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have one more. I've got one more thing, and then we'll see if people have questions. So for understandable reasons, none of your anthologies really touch on the queer comics tradition in Japan. Still, manga's become more important in the U.S. and so I guess I sort of wondered how you see that affecting queer comics, or how it's affected you, or if not at all. I don't know.
I don't read a lot of manga, but I have read a few different queer manga. The only thing I can think of is just that it is really accessible to young people right now in the U.S. I know a lot of kids, when I teach comics in schools and stuff, a lot of people are drawing in manga style and have been exposed to manga and stuff. I think it's exciting. In a way, we're slow to catch up with places like Japan or Belgium, or even or Mexico, that have a long, really tradition of longer traditions of adults taking comics seriously, and I just think it's something to listen to, rather than a lot of people talk about it aesthetically. Oh no, it's not kind of this on a manga aesthetic, but I would want to question that.
I was especially wondering about for you, Robert, because the stories I read in 3 are, they're not un-yaoi. There could be an audience there for, if people read yaoi, they could read your books too. I don't know if you feel like that's changed the audience, or if it's...
Yeah, I just don't know enough about yaoi in manga, but I know Justin in his class, he taught my book Curbside Boys, which I guess could be kind of a yaoi, and some of his students had to draw the characters in comic strips, and a couple of them looked very manga. I think they're obviously very influenced, and it worked really well. I think Curbside Boys should be done in a Japanese version. I think it should be remade. Yeah, they should do a Japanese remake.
I turned this book into a class at California College of the Arts, a queer comics project class. We did 2 semesters of this. We brought in different queer creators, and the students interviewed them, and we put it up on a Tumblr blog, No Straight Lines Tumblr blog. A lot of the students that were in the class really had come out of manga traditions. They read manga. They didn't read American comics so much. So it was interesting to kind of work with that. But I will say I don't know as much about manga traditions, but I love the Bada. So the primary ones are Yuri, and which is the lesbian comics, and then yaoi and Bada. And yaoi comics are stories of gay male sex and romance made by women for primarily female audiences. That's something that is happening more and more in the States, but it's still very new, and it brings up a whole lot of interesting questions about identity. The problem is that in Japan, the gay male stories made by gay men for gay men are called Bada, and they have a very different aesthetic, and they're sold only in gay bookstores. They're completely marginalized from the comic book industry within Japan, whereas yaoi is a completely mainstream genre. So there's this kind of Japan, even if it's 10 years ahead of us kind of technologically in a lot of ways in terms of kind of sexual and politics and such, gender politics, they're a bit behind, and it's reflected in a lot of the comics. So there's some amazing erotic comics, Gengoro Tagame, Jiraiya, some of the best erotic cartoonists in the world. But there's not a lot of literary queer comics coming out of Japan yet. It's starting to happen. You have some like Wandering Sun.
That's sort of... that's not exactly the case.
In comparison to the amount of yaoi,
Moto Higio.
Yeah.
There's a huge. I think it's probably more divided. I think that may be true for gay male creators, but for female queer creators, they're like some of the most important
Oh, like the Yuri stuff.
No. I mean, like people like Moto Hagio, whose sexual identity is like not super clear, like how she identifies or what she identifies as, but who has lots of gay themes in her work and who does seem to have some sort of queer identity. Right. And she's like one of the most important in the Year 24 group. So people, there's a large group of women who are doing literary.
Yeah, I think yaoi is kind of evolving and maturing as a form now, where it's moving beyond just kind of titillation into a more pretty serious literary form. I mean, I agree with you that is happening, but it's it was that's happening fairly recently in comparison.
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Moto
Hagio is she's from the 70s, and she's like a science fiction mangaka from the 70s. Fantagraphics just released one of her books. Okay. So I think it's kind of weird because it's not really before. Like, to say that they're behind or that they're ahead of us isn't exactly. It's just really different. Yeah. The way that the queer, but the queer comics tradition is kind of. I mean, it's definitely central. It's central in some ways, even though it's also right. I don't know anything about Bada, but the idea. But I can definitely see that some of it's really marginalized, whereas some of it's pretty central.
So, Bada tends to be more. The look of it is very different. It's like. Tend to be more kind of bearish guys, muscular, hairy, very much not what the yaoi archetypes are like. And they're made by gay men for gay men, as opposed to made by women for women.
Are the stories like just straight-ahead narratives?
The stories are narrative. They tend to be very sexual. You're right. I shouldn't. I mean, again, I don't know that much about manga, but I'm certainly no expert. But it's a completely different world. With its own set of internal dynamics, So.
Okay. So, does anybody have questions for any of the panelists? You're first. Go ahead.
This is a question for anyone who wants to answer it, but I know that you all have put a lot of heart and energy into promoting other people's work in your community and stuff you love, and I'm just wondering how you balance it with working, because you are all artists yourselves, and how you give yourself time to work on. Like, what's your thing? I guess.
So I have to repeat this for the audio. So the question is, all these anthologists put a lot of time into curating other people's works, and how they balance that with doing their own art.
It is. Anybody who edits an anthology, I mean, you really do. You're sacrificing your time and stuff, and it's obviously we believe in what we're doing and believe in these other people. But when I'm done with 3, there's going to be a kind of a big version of 3, I think, next year, hopefully. And after that, I really want to take a step back and work on some of my own stuff. But like I said, so anybody who really puts the time and effort into editing a big anthology, be it comics or short stories or whatever, take a moment and say thank you to them, because it's sacrificing a lot of your own time that you could be doing on other things. But in the end, this book and that book and these books, I mean, they're part of us too. I mean, this book is created by Justin. It happened because Justin made it happen, and it's, even though there's tons of other people in this book, I mean, that's Justin's book. I mean, so I applaud you, and I applaud editors.
Yeah. Well, and for one thing, it gives me deadlines. I'm not afraid to have my work in a book or in a project that I edit or co-edit, and I think that I always want to see that. I'm like, I want to know who that editor is. If people leave their work out, I'm always like, it's a mystery. But I definitely want to focus more on my own work, but I love collaborating. It's just, I can't get over it. But and just, it's really hard to find the time and space to just work on your own work. And there's something validating about working on group projects. There's a responsibility that I have to all the other artists to finish my work. Basically, mine was the last one to be done for this book, and that's really I saved it to the last, because that was the only thing I really had total control over, was my own story. and other people were slowly getting their stuff in. But when it came down to crunch time, that was mine. That was how I finished it. So that's part of my motivating force.
It was also one of the longest and most ambitious and beautiful pieces in the book. I mean, it's pretty remarkable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Couldn't have done it without all that.
For the last year and a half, I've been kind of doing this book and teaching and developing this into a class, and my own work has definitely fallen by the wayside, and it's unfortunate. So I'm just starting to work on my submission to the next 3, and drudging up all this crazy shit from my my ex-boyfriend, who's a kind of straight ex-military sociopath, something. And so I'm like, oh yeah. So it's back to the psychological drawing board and all that kind of stuff. So I'm enjoying it immensely. It's fantastic.
The psychological drawing board is
So I'm really excited to actually start drawing again and start dredging up this shit for myself, and not just helping others process or whatever. So yeah, it's always a balancing act, right?
Go ahead.
I had a question for all 3 of you, and I was wondering about, as far as like working as an editor with people that you're really excited about, but you're saying maybe sometimes they're submitting work that maybe either doesn't fit in a way that is maybe like offensive, or in a way, or not the way you want the work to be portrayed in the anthology, or that it's maybe not up to par with what you know they're capable of. And I was wondering, how do you approach that? Because I have a lot of trouble with that. And does it come naturally, or is it?
So the question is, when there's work submitted that is not what you're looking for, how you work with them to get work that you like.
Yeah, what I try to do is I try to be, again, like very nurturing editor. Like I tell people I just want this to be the best work it can be, the best work that you can do. And I had a guy for the last Boy Trouble book with Green Candy. I had him recolor it. And again, I just go very gently. I said, I'll publish it if you want, as is, but have you thought about no. And he did, and he later thanked me. He said he admitted it was better. The color job before just didn't sit right with me. It was just kind of odd. And I normally just copy edit people. I make sure that they're the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But yeah, every now and again, somebody turns in something. I've been pretty lucky. But again, I very carefully curate these. I really pick people very carefully, people I trust, and whose work I love.
For this book, at least, I was picking a work that was already completed for the most part. I did some edits especially for other foreign language stuff that came in, help with English translations and such. But with the Glamazonia book, I definitely work with some people. I try to be fairly hands-off because I'm not paying them enough, that's for sure, So I feel like I have kind of limited amounts of, pull, basically. So it's tricky.
That kind of thing does not come naturally to me. Critiquing other people's, heartfelt work. But like you guys, I mostly knew the work of the people that were involved, and some of them were total surprises. I mean, a lot of the stuff was a total surprise what I got, but yeah, I dug it, and I was like, well, this is, and I knew that certain people. I mean, there's certain stuff, especially in this book, that just doesn't look like comics at all, and that's the comics that I want to publish. So.
You also have to be okay with people not liking you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I my own personality type. I really hate being disliked, and and it's you have to suck that up, because if you're going to put out a piece and edit a piece, you have to. Some people are not going to like your choices.
Yeah, and I mean this is a really really specific kind of book, and honestly, it has not been reviewed very much at all. We sent out 100 copies, and maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people reviewed it. I don't know if that's because they didn't know what to think of it, or if that's because it's queer and very queer and scary queer, or if they didn't like it. I mean, I know Vice magazine didn't like it, but I count that as a 2 thumbs up. So.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Is there
or subgenre of work that you ran across or put in your anthology that is exciting that people should know about? Like, so give me just one artist, but it could just be like also a literary or artistic form that you are seeing that queer creators are making that people should know about. That's not totally maybe not too available in the mainstream or alt comics world.
One thing that springs to mind is what I mentioned before, Christine Smith doing this all ages web comic called The Princess, which is about a trans girl, and it's fantastic to have kind of all ages queer material. That's a really kind of new feel. I mean, there's a lot of edgy stuff in here, but to have kind of queer material that's also all ages is I think a really important project, and there's not enough of that, so everybody here makes some. It's a good thing to have. Yeah.
Justin, do you think that might be kind of a new trend? Maybe how like food comics are really becoming big. Do you think like all ages queer stuff?
I hope.
I could totally.
Not enough. There's not enough yet, but hopefully there will be. Yeah.
The first thing that popped into my head is just that a lot of people, like in this book, do lots of things besides comics. And I know here we are at a comics convention, and like comics are like my passion, my jam. But I like to look at the different things that people do, musical projects, performance stuff, the way that they bring comics, merge comics with film, the way that comics influence, just all kinds of other work that people are doing. Even though I wish that they were all doing just comics, in my secret heart or whatever, I'm like, ooh, but if you just did comics, they're like, well, really, I want to do performance. I'm like, that's cool, that's great. I'm sure I will love it. But but just showing that and like looking into people's lives in this way where it's like a lot of people like the identities in the book and the multiple identities have multiple artistic strengths. So I would just say that.
You've been trying for a while, sorry. Go ahead.
I guess, what do you think would have to happen for I guess, like, for gay content to be able to happen in literary stories that are not, what's the word I'm looking for, like, I guess, like, sci-fi stuff or just, like, other, stuff besides, I mean, this stuff is obviously very important for telling personal stories and coming to terms with self and stuff like that. But then on the other hand, like I'm more of a sci-fi writer and like stuff like that. And the genre in the story is first, and then I have like the gay characters, like that's part of an aspect of their character, but it's kind of second. I mean, what we have to do to, I guess, not have it be regulated to the point where like how yaoi is only regulated by heterosexual Japanese women making this for heterosexual Japanese women who just like happen to see this, and the only girl-on-girl stuff you get in mainstream American stuff is straight guys making, girl-on-girl stuff. What we have to do to like get that visibility in just regular sci-fi?
Yeah. So she's. I'm sorry. He's asking. The question is basically. I guess basically, at what point would gay material be acceptable in genre, or be just a part of genre rather than something?
There is definitely some. I mean, the one story that immediately popped into my head was in Juicy Mother 2 by Ivan Velez Jr. And or was it Juicy Mother 1? I think it was 2. And it's this weird story about this girl. I think she's a dyke. She's in school and she has this contact with these aliens. I mean, and that's. Her lesbianism is completely incidental to the story. It's a sci-fi story, and I know there's other things. Andy Hartzell often uses tropes of fantasy to tell story. I mean, like there's gay content, but and those are in some of the Boy Troubles and other things. So it's out there in bits and pieces, but maybe if you're a cartoonist, maybe that's what you want to start. DIY, baby,
It's interesting that you say that because I thought it was the other way around because I don't read a lot of like sci-fi or superhero type stuff, but from what I've seen on DeviantArt and things like that, I'm like, it looks like people are really queering this stuff, whether or not it's like real super queer, like, hey, we're queer, we're gay, or whatever. Just that, like, you can do that with sci-fi.
I mean, people like Samuel Delaney, and I mean, there's and Ursula K. Le Guin. I mean, there is a especially from the 70s, there's this tradition of queer and feminist inspired sci-fi, but I mean, it's somewhat arty. So there's also a lot of stuff that doesn't really think about that at all.
But in a way, I feel like you can almost slip it in and just because people are coming, so to speak, because people are coming to that like to have their minds blown anyway, and just like I think it would be refreshing.
There's also this kind of weird thing where it's like, I think a lot of people think of kind of gay literature or queer literature as a genre, and it's not really a genre. It's a kind of it's not a it's a thematic grouping or something, a thematic thread or something. So you can have so queerness can kind of and queer themes can intersect with any of these genres, and I think some of the genre literature that does that is some of the most exciting and will be in the future. I think definitely.
And there's also, just to finish up, I mean, there's also the argument that, there are queer themes in, superhero comics, definitely. I mean, like just all over the place. So it's a kind of a question of less whether they're there as to, I mean, you sort of said this yourself as to how they're used or thought about. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think we are out of time, really this time. And I just thanks so much to all our panelists, and thanks to Edie for letting me do this.
How much do your comics cost?
Oh.
Where can we find them?
Yeah.
Table 47.
The right information.
Oh yeah, table 10, we're right around the corner. Anyone here, if you want to get this for it's usually $20, but for anyone here, 15 or 2 for 20.
Yeah, I'm table 47, like really, literally right outside the doors there, and 3 is $6. I have 2 issues left, and I have some other stuff for various prices, and talk to me.
I'm at table 77 with Northwest Press, and we're selling the Glamazonia. It's 25, and this is 35. This is the first time that this has been available. It's not hitting the shelves until July, the week of Comic-Con. So this is the debut.